friends, a very good morning to all of you. Last week, we briefly tried to analyze the dominant issues that concern the Indian economy and the Indian nation, and said that how the budget has addressed to solve these dominant problems. We had decided that we will try to look at certain important sectors which are necessary for the development of the nation separately. Today, we will try to analyze the education sector, because this sector is very vital for the national development. Education not only enhances the development of a person, but it also gives him the confidence to look at the world, interpret and understand the situation as it exists. And not just that, even for the nation to develop, the economy to develop, education is necessary. Only an educated and a skilled labor force can contribute to the progress and development of the economy. And here we find that the budget has faltered. The budget has not given enough attention on the issue of education, especially at a time when the last 2 years have been terrible for the education sector. Schools were closed, children were out of schools, there were no a definite pattern of learning for these children, and the last 2 years are going to be a very heavy price that poorer sections of the Indian population and their children have to pay. And it is in this context we expected that the budget would address to all these concerns, but unfortunately it does not meet the expectations that we had from this budget. India has to go a long way in terms of eradicating illiteracy. According to the government-owned statistics, 77% of the Indians are literate, which automatically means that 33% of the Indian population is illiterate. We need to understand what this literacy is. The definition of literacy is that any person over the age of 7, if he or she is in a position to read or write in any one language, that is considered as literacy. So literacy does not mean the schooling, it just means the ability of a person above the age of 7 to read or write in any one language. And 33% of the Indian population today are illiterates. And the figures that are available to us suggest that at present there are 310 million Indians who are illiterates, and they constitute 37% of the total global illiterates. While the India share in the total population of the world is something much smaller, it has got a disproportionately high share of illiterates in the total global illiterates. So this is a issue that should concern all of us. Now, we say that the Constitution recognizes the need for education and it wants the state to intervene with proper policies to ensure that it provides education to all children in the country. Article 21A of the Constitution says that it is the fundamental right of any child between the age 6 and 14 to receive education. And this makes it very clear that it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that every child between the age 6 and 14 must receive the education and they must be in the schools. But what we found during the COVID period is that nearly 2 crore children, 20 million children were out of schools. They did not go to the school. Secondly, we also have the largest child labor in the world, and it is estimated that more than 1 crore children are employed as child labor. And this is totally cruel to the poorer sections of the people. The state is not fulfilling its obligations and its duties as mandated by the Constitution. When we look at the status of the education today, you would very clearly find that the government has failed to provide proper infrastructure. It has failed to recruit adequate number of teachers. The government own survey suggests that there are 60,000 schools which are a single room schools. And then there are 46% of the schools do not have the drinking water, they do not have functional toilets, and they do not have a hand wash facility. And it is disturbing to note that more than 1 lakh schools are a single teacher school, where from class 1 to class 7 or class 10, a single teacher has to manage all the students. And this is the terrible failure of the state to create the infrastructure for public education. Then we also have that in the primary and secondary schools, the government schools, 20% of the sanctioned vacancies of the teachers remain unfilled. So when this is the infrastructure that is available, how is it possible to ensure a good education to the children? Now the budget talks about various things. It talks about digital education, it talks about online education, forgetting the fact that there is no avenues available for the poorer section of the children to take benefit of this digital education or the online education. And a parliamentary committee itself found that around 27% of the children only enjoyed the benefit of online education. The rest of the children were deprived of this benefit because they did not have the smartphone, they did not have the televisions, and most of them stayed out of the process of education, losing 2 full academic years. And when the government talks about digital education, our online education, the same parliamentary committee says that 46% of the schools in India do not have electricity. That is, the government owned schools do not have the electricity. When government owned schools do not have the electricity, the issue is that sending computers to these schools is not going to solve the problem. You need to create the infrastructure, you need to empower the schools, you need to empower the students, and this is where this budget misses it. Now we have a new education policy, and it suggests that the government must spend around 6% of the GDP on education. And this is not just the new education policy. Long back, perhaps in 1966 or so, Kothari Commission had also recommended that the government must spend 6% of the GDP, both state and the union government taken together, to spend on education, to make education really educative. But we find that even today the government is nowhere near what is mandated by the new education policy or the Kothari Commission. When we come to the present budget, the 2022-23, the union budget has allocated 1,04,277 crores for both primary, secondary and higher education. Now, this is an increase from 93,225 crores that was there in the last budget. But the increase is very minimum. But when you look at the in percentage terms, in relation to the total budget spending, it comes to 2.64%. And in terms of the union GDP, it comes to 0.4%. And taking all together, state and the center taken together, there is a tremendous resource crunch as far as education is concerned. So where is the question of spending 6% of the GDP and where the union budget allocation amounts to 0.4% of the GDP? And then we have seen that even while allocating the funds within this budget, certain midday meal, the school enrollment improved because of the midday meal. It is an accepted fact, but the budget for the midday meal has been cut down. Then there is also a dispute what should be served in midday meal, whether egg is vegetarian or non-vegetarian, and the government has reduced the budget expenditure on the midday meal. Secondly, there are certain scholarships for the SC/ST, OBC and the weaker sections of the community. The budget allocation is reduced even for this. So on a whole, the budget fails to address the real problem. How to develop a proper education system. And many surveys have pointed out that even the students in the class 6 or class 7, they are not in a position to attend to a mathematical question of class 2. So quality of education, the infrastructure, the student-teacher ratio, all this had to be addressed. And instead of that, the whole budget talks rhetorically about e-education, digital education, all this, but it refuses to accept the ground reality and make a determined policy intervention to improve the education. And when the allotment on education sector, when the government fails to allocate proper resources and have a policy to implement it, it is the poor who suffer. And we have seen in the last few years, there are institutes, there are technology developed like Byju's, which is creating a tremendous inequality where the richer sections of the people can give a education, take the help of Byju, take the help of various education technological institutions, but the poor cannot afford to. And they depend upon the teacher in the school. And when you have to compete with this kind of differences, naturally the poorer sections fail to compete. And today we also find out that the various surveys carried out by the government itself suggest that even those people who have acquired a technical qualification like engineers, the industry finds them unsuitable to be employed because they don't have the skills. So a lot of thinking has to go for the education. The education is very important. This is a sector which empowers. And therefore, the progressive sections, the trade union movement must decide to include the issue of education in their struggles and force the government to allocate much larger budget, create the infrastructure and make the public education affordable for the common people. But unfortunately, the government today is privatizing the education, as in many other sectors, and a large number of schools in India are controlled by the private sector. And this private sector, the amount of fees that the people have to pay is going to have a devastating impact on the weaker sections of the people who the constitution mandates that the state must provide them education. So therefore, this issue also must find a important point in the campaign of the progressive sections and the trade union movement. We will take up some other issue, some other sector next week and try to discuss that issue. Till then, goodbye, take care.